Are you looking for ways to improve your hamstring strength so you can have better performance either on the field or in the gym? I'm going to show you today 3 exercises that I use as some foundational movements when programming for athletes of all levels. How do I know this? My name is Dr. Jeff Lewis. I'm the owner and physical therapist of Lewis Physical Therapy and Sports Rehab of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, where I've helped countless throwing athletes get back to throwing pain-free, get stronger, and throw harder after an injury. Hamstring strength is huge, and really, regardless of your sport, whether it's CrossFit, lifting, baseball, football, it's something that you need all throughout the spectrum there. A lot of times I see athletes that are very quad dominant, meaning they have really developed strong quads on the front, even hip flexors to a degree, but when we look on the other side of their body, hamstrings, glutes especially, are pretty weak. So if we just take in the context of a pitcher more than anything. So say I got a right-handed pitcher here, and I'm going to talk a little bit why this hamstring is so important. I have a right-handed pitcher pushing off the mound. You're going to get a lot of quad involvement pushing off the mound, but we also want to have the ability to sit into our back hip and drive off the mound in this direction here as you're driving down the mound. That's sitting into the hip. That's going to kick on glutes. That's going to kick on hamstrings. And then especially as you're driving down and you're pushing off the mound like so, that hip needs to get some active extension. So that extension means your leg is coming behind you like this. More often than not, guys are pretty weak in extension and they end up going more through their back or more through their quad, which creates some issues down the line from a throwing mechanic standpoint. Now looking at the front leg, so in this case our left leg, we want to make sure that they're able to land in a stable position on that leg. So as they're coming down, they can have, it's like about 45 degrees of knee flexion. And there's a little bit of some eccentric quad control there. But we want to make sure that they have then the ability to, as they're coming through, to brace onto that front leg to about roughly 30 degrees of knee flexion. They're not fully straight. They're just slightly straightening it a little bit more. Now, part of that position is you want to make sure that you have good eccentric control and strength of those hamstrings and that glute as well as you're going into that position. That's why we work at the RDL position a lot for pitchers, which we're going to go over today. So the hamstrings have 2 main functions more than anything. They work to flex the knee, and then they work to extend the hip. A lot of times from what I see, the hamstrings people really only strengthen the hamstrings in this knee flexion dominant position, which is important, but I feel like more often than not, its ability to work as a hip extensor is not worked on properly. And I've seen the case where people have stronger glutes and very weak hamstrings in that regard, and vice versa. But we want to make sure that hamstring works well as a hip extensor. So I'm going to go over today a couple of the movements that I use to introduce some hamstring strengthening into someone's program for a knee flexion bias and a hip flexion bias. So first thing that we're going to do is just some double leg glute bridges on a bench or some type of elevated surface. So what you're going to do, you're going to line your back here. You're going to have both heels on the bench, and I'm just going to start with my knees at about 90 degrees here, okay? So we'll start double leg here. Hands are on the ground for support if you need to. You're just going to dig your heels into the table. Into the bench. You're going to push up, and then you're going to come down. So I want to make sure when we're at the top, I'm not just arching my low back like that. I want to keep a nice hollow position, and you should feel it's primarily glutes, hamstrings. Heels are going to be on the bench like so. I don't want your feet flat. When those heels are on the bench and your toes are up, that's going to kick on those hamstrings a little bit more. All right, so that double leg glute bridge, that's one of the first drills that we're going to do. Next, to get a little bit more of a knee dominant work for that hamstring, to work it both concentrically, meaning shortening, and eccentrically from a lengthening standpoint, what we're going to do, you're going to grab an exercise ball. This is a pretty big one, so you don't need necessarily one this big. You can use something that's a little bit smaller if needed, but we're going to be lying on our back here. Both feet, I would say you don't necessarily want your heels on the ball. You want like your lower leg, your lower leg on the ball here more than anything. So your heels will also be in contact. We want that lower leg there. What you're going to do, you're going to push your feet into the ball. Hips come up from here. Next, you're going to curl in like so, and then nice and slow on the way out. As you're going out, you can let your hips lower down, but eventually we want to get to the point where hips go up, we curl in, curl out, hips stay up the entire time. Curl in, curl out, hips stay up, okay? And there's some other variations we can do from that, but that's really one of the big ones that we're going to do there to get some hamstring strength. You'll get some hip extension component there as well because you're keeping your hips up. That's why I like to do that. But you're going to get a lot of that knee dominant, that lower mid hamstring part, okay? The last thing we're going to do is that kickstand RDL. And the reason I want to do that is because we want to make sure from two different sides of things, from our drive leg, excuse me, that we know how to sit into that back hip, but also so that we know how to properly stabilize ourselves in that position when we're going to create that lead leg blocker brace, all right? So first thing we're going to do, we're going to go no weight. We're going to start with our left leg here. You're going to have a slight knee bend, so like that's about it right there, not much more. Your back foot, it's not far behind you like this. It's almost like right behind your front foot, and it's really just there for balance. You shouldn't have a whole lot of weight through there. Hands are going to be on your hips. You're pushing your hips straight back. Standing up tall. So I want you straightening that leg at the top to get used to going from that flex to extended position. Hip goes back. So this should be felt, in this case, primarily my left hip or glute, and then I'm standing up tall. All right, again, what happens more often than not is as people go down, they almost turn this into a squat. We don't want this to be a squat. You should not have your knee bend any further than that. Once your knee bends a little bit at the start, it doesn't move anymore from there. It only comes from your hip, all right? The other compensation I see is as people go down, they kind of turn it into a squat with this leg. Again, that's just not going to feel good on that knee, so we just don't want to do that. So that's what it looks like from a weight standpoint. We'll grab a weight in each hand. Slight knee bend here. On the toes for the back. Again, that back foot is just there for balance. Going down front of my leg into the hip. Standing up tall, straighten that leg. Stand up tall, straighten the leg. Just go to mid-shin. Don't worry about going down to the ground. For most people, by trying to go down to the ground, it's probably going to come more from your back than it is from your hip, which we don't necessarily want. So those are 3 movements that I use with people to strengthen their hamstrings at both the knee and the hip. Go ahead and give them a try in your program. If you have questions about it, leave one below in the comment section or text the number below and we'll get back to you on how we can help you with a personalized program.